Welcome to this session of Infotouch University Online, where we go in-depth into the features and functions of our point-of-sale product lines. Today's topic is suspended transactions. So, a suspended transaction is a transaction, as you might guess, that is suspended. It is not really a sale. It is a way of putting things on hold, on layaway, appointments. In fact, the 6 different types of suspended transactions we have are wholesales, CWOs or special orders, layaways, appointments, quotes, and a newest one that we just added recently, work orders. So we're going to go into all of those today except for appointments, which has its own separate webinars. We may talk briefly about some of the changes we've made there, but in general, we're going to cover the other 5 transaction types. We're also going to go into understanding some of the changes we made in the way that these suspended transactions can use deposits and can use the customer charge tender. It has actually been significantly improved from the way it used to be. But for now, let's go ahead and get started with the basics. All right. And let me get in here now. Somebody had sent a question. Hello, Jeanette. The most basic type of suspended transaction is what we call a hold sale. And a hold sale is just a way, the classic example that I usually give in demonstrations for what a hold sale is customer comes in the store, takes several things into their shopping basket, takes it up to the register, they're all rung up, and then they reach into their jacket or their purse and find out that, oops, I left my checkbook out in the car. So by suspending a sale real quickly, they can go back out to the car, come back in and finish it up. So let's see how that works. So let's say the customer comes in and wants to get a book and a souvenir, picture frame in this case, and now they go and say, oh, rats, I forgot my checkbook. So all you have to do, and really this example honestly makes more sense if we're talking about more than a couple items. It wouldn't be a big deal to put 2 items to the side and re-ring it up, but if they bought 40 or 50 or 75 items, it'd be kind of nicer to just kind of wait for them to run right out to the car and come back while processing other customers. So I hit the 2 buttons, the 2 items, and now I'm going to suspend the sale as a hold sale by hitting suspend recall. And there's a couple options here. We could link the sale first to a customer, in which case we wouldn't get this prompt. But hold sales are unique among all of the 6 different types of suspended transactions we have because it does not require a sale to be linked to a customer. So let's say it was Jeanette that was getting these items, and she goes back out to the car, and we've just suspended the sale. So we've recorded what Jeanette wanted here. Sorry, Jeanette. But we have not turned this into a sale, and you can tell on the top here it says wholesale number. By the way, all suspended transactions are recorded in the wholesale database and receive their own unique numbering, so we can be assured that real sales are contiguous. That is to say, we have sale number 27, 28, 29. We don't want those wholesale numbers interfering. So we get a wholesale number, a receipt would generally print, and I can now go ring up another sale if somebody comes in and wants to buy a t-shirt. No problem, we'll pay with cash just to make it quick. And so we've done a sale. You'll notice invoice numbering much higher level in this particular case, and almost certainly in all cases, versus the wholesale number. All right, so Jeanette comes back in. And if you hit that suspend recall button before you ring up any items, then the software says, well, they don't have anything to suspend. They must be wanting to recall a suspended transaction. That's why the button's called Suspend Recall. And you could do this by a wide variety of methods. So it could be by date. It could be by the number that was printed out on that receipt, by the ID, in this case, because it was not linked to a customer. And that's worth mentioning, by the way. ID recalls are related to suspended sales that are not linked to customers. Whereas if a suspended sale is linked to a customer, you could look it up by their number or their name or even the date in the customer name, although it's honestly little used these days. You could even look it up by the employee, and we'll get a bit later into the expiration due date that is related to both quotes in our new work order transaction. It doesn't matter a whole lot. I'm just going to use date for now. There's only one here, and if there were more than one, we would go ahead and get a list, a scrollable list. In fact, let's go ahead and make one real quick just to see the difference. So somebody comes in and they want to buy a newspaper. And this time I'm going to link it to the customer account so you can just see, when I say link it to a customer account, we're not talking about receivables. We'll talk about that later. We're just talking about linking it to a customer. So here's customer number 2, and we get some information about them, and now we'll hit Suspend Recall, and we've made another wholesale. So now when we recall by date, we got a couple of them here. And we'll see that, in fact, the software knows that one was made to Jeanette, who doesn't have a customer number, so it's not in our database, and one was made to a firm called Johnson, Lee & Brown. So let's go ahead and recall the one that Jeanette did. Now, when you recall any suspended sale, you can make all the changes you want. You can go ahead and add new items, put in a magazine, put in a bunch of magazines. And we can go ahead and say, well, I decided with all those magazines, I don't really want the book anymore. So in other words, you can do whatever you want with this, and you can even resuspend it. Doesn't go along quite with the example I gave with going out to the car for the checkbook, but you want to know that the flexibility is there. A wholesale can be suspended, recalled, modified, resuspended forever until you're ready to turn it into a sale. And the system remembers that this was linked to Jeanette. And now let's recall it again. And now Jeanette's got her checkbook. And, wow, those are some expensive magazines here. But she's going to pay for it anyhow. And now this has been turned into a sale. So there's no longer any suspended sale linked to Jeanette. There's a transaction that's been made, and the other suspended transactions are there. So that's a wholesale. It's very simple and basic. The thing that's unique about it is because it does not force you to link a sale to a customer, you are not allowed to put a deposit on a wholesale. Every other suspended transaction type now allows deposits, and that's part of the changes we made, but some of them have always allowed deposits, like layaways, or in fact require deposits. All other suspended transaction types are forced to be linked to customers, and therefore, okay, if you're going to give us some money, we want to know who you were, because we could probably owe you that money. In fact, by law in many states, we could owe you that money. So, all right, so that's suspended sales or wholesales, and they're very, very basic. The other types of suspended sales that we have in the system have to be started a different way. That is, you can't just ring up items like you were doing a regular sale and then hit suspend recall. That one's reserved for wholesales. So there's 2 different options for getting the other suspended sales set, and they're dedicated buttons. In fact, I have one here for special orders. But you should also know that regardless of how your buttons are set up, you can always go into the manager menu, and under customer transactions, because remember, all these other types must be linked to a customer, special order, layaway, quotes, and work orders, you can start it from there. So let's start a special order from here. And you'll notice the first thing the software does is says, okay, well, if you're doing a special order, by the way, also known as a customer waiting order or CWO, so the terminology is a little confusing. We started off with the terminology CWO, but many people find the term special order a lot more friendly, so we actually use both, depending on where you are. They are the same thing, though, don't worry. All right, so I have a special order here. I want to find the customer by whatever. Well, I decide not to do that. Okay, no problem. You can't do it. Special orders must be linked to a customer. We can do it from here, though, quite easily. And again, find customers by, and let's go ahead and find them by name. In this case, we've got Mary Hamilton here. We'll go ahead and select her, and you'll notice that we now have up in the left-hand corner a yellow box saying that we're doing a CWO. And again, forgive us for the confusing terminology, but it's going to say CWO rather than special order sale. And now we can bring up items just like we normally might. That was by scanning. We'll add a thermal mug to the mix. And at this point, we would hit suspend recall to save this special order or this CWO, customer waiting order. Unlike wholesales, though, since CWOs must be linked to a customer, we are allowed to put a deposit on it. So let's go ahead and say that the store really wants to get $5 in order to special order these items for this customer. All right, so we've now actually put a deposit on it. You can see it up here. It was $5 tendered. There's still a balance of $11 and change, and we've created a new record in the wholesale suspended transaction database of this type. Let's take a look again at our transactions by today, and you'll notice that we have two in there. The wholesale that I did earlier to the Johnson, Lee & Brown firm, and notice the C after the hold number here. So this is the suspended transaction that we did with Mary. And it'll show you that she put $5 down and she's got a balance of whatever. Once you recall that transaction, you can do a number of things with it. So once you touch it, I should say, you can recall it to make changes. You could make intermediate payments, which are probably most useful for layaways, or you can decide to delete it. Let's just recall it here. And oops, we had a little unintended consequence here as the software decided that Mary had enough loyalty points to redeem for buying that thermal mug for free. Let's go ahead and get rid of that one. Notice I'm touching the line, though, and nothing's happening. Now I can try and ring up the line, but it says, no, you can't do that. The reason is we're seeing tenders. And with the software, we don't like, at the point where you tender something, you can't make changes to the line items. So the way to get around this, and this comes up quite frequently, just hit the cancel button. Don't worry that you've actually lost your deposit. That deposit is going to come back anytime we go to either resuspend the sale or to cash it out and turn it into a real transaction. So now that I don't see those tender lines, I can go ahead and get rid of that thermal mug. So I really didn't want to redeem those loyalty points. The software has some options about that. And you'll notice it's also telling you that currently now, even though you don't see that $5 cash, that based on that and the $9.95 price of the t-shirt, that the balance is $4.95. So let's go ahead and add a book to this. Okay. Now, so I've made some changes, and I have options here. I can suspend or recall and go ahead and resave it off as a suspended sale, or I can turn it into a real transaction. let's go ahead and turn it into a real suspend it. You notice that $5, we didn't forget about it. You can't forget about it. Let's go ahead now and say that Mary's coming in and is going to turn this into a real transaction. And she's going to pay with cash. And she only has to pay the balance based on her original amount that she tendered for it. Okay, whenever you get one of these suspended transactions where you have deposits, we do give you an option once you pay it off completely to still resuspend it. And the reason has mostly to do with layaways. So in a holiday scenario, somebody might go in and make a layaway. They put down their deposit. They might put down some intermediate payments. And then when it comes time to pay it off, you know, sorry, it's only December 10th. I really don't want to take this home just yet. I need to let you guys keep it. So the closeout CWO, closeout layaway, you'll see these in a number of cases, question comes up so that you can let the store hold on to it. Even though you've fully paid it off, you can keep it as a suspended transaction. By the way, suspended transactions are not treated as sales. They're treated as suspended transactions, which means that inventory is not relieved. When you go ahead and put an item on a suspended sale, the quantity allocated in the inventory record is incremented so that we don't know you're going to take it. In many cases, for example, with layaways, there's state requirements that you let the customer come back in and say, you know what, I don't want this anymore, give me my money back, maybe take a fee out of them, but we don't want to really consider that quantity being reduced out of stock. So we treat it separately with the quantity allocated field. By the way, in terms of automatic purchase order generation or order status reports and the like, we do take the quantity allocated into account. We do consider that basically as if it's out of stock, so we take the quantity on hand and subtract the quantity allocated because we think that somebody has a handle on taking it from the store, but it's tracked separately so that you can maintain that. All right, so to turn the transaction into a sale, on this closeout question, you're going to want to say yes. And she earned some loyalty points, and now this is a real sale. A variation of the CWO is the layaway. Excuse me. I don't have a layaway button on here, so we'll go to our customer transactions, make a new layaway. Let's go ahead and put in customer number 5, Wallace Smith. All right, Wallace. So Wallace is going to come in, and he wants to get a book. And by the way, so this is an old hotel gift store vertical that we're looking at right now. And maybe he wants to also get a sweatshirt. All right, so now you know that with layaways, you typically have some kind of deposit plan. Let's show you where that comes from. In Setup, under the Customers tab, there's a Layaways button that allows you to define the configuration of your layaways. And by the way, whatever you put in here is actually saved with the layaway. So if the store decides to change the kind of deposit amount that they need and the intermediate payment types, it won't affect the layaways that have already come before. So you can either have a percentage or dollar deposit amount, and these are minimum. You can always pay more. The store's going to be happy to take the money, but they won't let you put these items on layaway unless you pay, in this case, 25% down. There's also a feature for intermediate payments, so we might say that for every 30 days that layaway is outstanding after the initial time that it's made, we want another 10%, but no matter what, we want the whole thing paid in 90 days. So that's where this stuff comes from. I'll leave this running for a bit. And you should know, by the way, that there is a layaways report in the customer module that will show you And we don't have to get into the details, but it's basically a statement that you can mail to the customer so that if you wanted them, for example, to pay every 30 days, you could run this report and send it out to them. And it'll show them, based on the layaway configuration that we just saw, what they owe as of the time the report is printed. We can run it real quick, but I'm really not sure what we're going to find here. All right, so we've got some layaways here for Mary Hamilton, stretching back to 2003. I think she owes the entire amount due for those, and we have some more recent ones, and you get a separate page per customer that has layaways outstanding. All right, back to the register. So when Wallace wants to pay for his deposit, you'll notice that when we say we accept cash, the balance is $1912. This is coming up with $478. Why? Because that's 25% of $1912, and that's what we said was required on the initial layaway. Beyond that one initial requirement of the deposit, special orders don't require a deposit. You can put them in, but they're optional. Layaways do require it. Beyond that, there's really no difference between layaways and special orders. It's really more of a nice tool to make sure that you can go ahead and get that initial deposit and also mail out those layaway statements. All right, so we won't bother filling this in, and we'll go on to the next type of transaction that we have, suspended transaction. That's a quote. And I don't believe I have a button for that right now. So we'll go into our customer transactions and put in a quote. And again, like the other transaction types we've seen so far, outside of wholesales, these are going to have to be linked to a customer, and you can recall them however you like. In fact, if you just put in a blank on telephone, you're going to get every one that you have in the database. Let's go ahead and select the Nature Conservancy. All right, so what's the difference between a quote and these other types is the fact that quotes have expirations. It's a quote. So what we're trying to do is say, hey guy or woman or organization or whatever, these items that we ring up right now, we're going to put them in at whatever price you want or whatever price we want, and we will guarantee that you will get these items at the quoted price until the expiration date. So you have to put in an expiration date. It's the whole purpose of having a quote here. And now we can ring up items. I'll scan one in. There is no requirement for a deposit on quotes. However, and we'll talk more about this whole deposit thing in just a second, the customer charge, quotes do now allow a deposit. They did not as of maybe about a month ago. So this has been a change in all the suspended transaction types, and we'll get into that in a second. But if we want to just go ahead and save off this quote without a deposit, no problem, just hit suspend recall. One other setup option I want to call your attention to is in the miscellaneous customers thing, screen, security level to retain quote pricing after expiration date. So here's what happens with a quote. If you recall the quote before or on the expiration date, then there's no issue. We give you the pricing we quoted and you finish it off. If you recall the quote after the expiration date, well, we're no longer bound to give you that price anymore, and by default, we will recalculate the price of all the items in the quote at the current pricing. However, there is this option here which allows you to select any one of the security levels from none to never allow that says, you know what? Instead of just automatically recalculating the pricing after the expiration date, in this case, let's go ahead and see if they have the managers, if they want to actually retain the pricing. And if they do, I'm going to force them to put in a manager level password or higher. So there's an option after quotes are finished to go ahead and still give them the special pricing. It's up to the store to say whether there's security required for that. I mean, if you had it at none, then what would happen is you would recall the quote, it'd say this is expired, would you like to keep the pricing? You'd say yes, and it'd be fine. If you had it at manager or what have you, it would do the same thing, but after you said okay, that you wanted to keep the pricing, you'd have to put in a password. And if you had set to never allow, then you don't get the option. It's going to be automatically recalculated. All right, so let's recall our quote. And you notice a couple of new things in here, right? We did our layaway, and it's got an L after it. Now we've got a Q for quote. And if we wanted to go ahead and finish that out, well, it's before the expiration date. We'll keep the pricing. They didn't pay anything, so they owe the whole amount. And I've got some more loyalty points here. Okay, that's fine. Let's go ahead. We'll go ahead and take the loyalty points. I mean, it's reasonable enough, I suppose. And we'll pay with a check. And we just finished out our quote. The newest transaction type is called a work order. And it is essentially an offshoot, if you would, of quote. What happened, and we've had this from at least a couple of resellers, is they're in businesses where they need to either prepare something or deliver something, and they need to do it by a specific date. Now, this isn't typically a long-term quote. It's more of a work order, workflow kind of issue where, okay, I want to put into the system that I'm going to deliver 500 pounds of dirt, for example. That was actually the original customer that wanted the work order. There was an example about a bakery that made wedding cakes, and they needed a bit of time for preparation. So what we had is a suspended sale that had essentially a due date or a delivery date, and we wanted to be able to manage that operation. So if I'm doing a bunch of these wedding cakes, for example, I want to know today what ones I need to produce for today, or for the delivery to the garden center. I want to be able to schedule and understand who's got to go out and deliver what to whom. So it's different than a quote in the sense that we're not talking about pricing, we're really talking about managing operations, but it's still a suspended sale with a date on it. So we kind of enhanced the work order, and it's under manager menu, customer transactions always, or you can have a button for it. And instead of putting in your expiration date, you put in your work order due date, which has to be in the future. And now you bring up your items. As with the quote and with the other transactions, you can put a deposit. Unlike the layaway where you must put in a deposit, it's optional. So let's go ahead and put a deposit on this one. I'll just put in $2. One of the other things we did associated with this work order transaction type, and it also works for the quote type as well, is we put in a button for being able to find these type of transactions specifically by the due date or the expiration date. So when I come into the store and I want to know what I have to do today, what I have to deliver or what cakes I have to make or whatever you might want to use that for, we'll allow you to go ahead and put in that date. And there's that quote that we just did that work order we just did to Wallace Smith. Now, you can also recall quotes by this as well. So instead of having to look for it by the date that you placed it into the system, we're going to allow you to easily recall it by the date that you need to work on it. And if there are more than one of these, in fact, let's go ahead and make more than one of these. So we'll do another work order, put it to a different customer, but put the same work order date in, the due date. I'll just put in a single item. It's just for show at this point. So there's the two different transactions that we've done that are done today. So you can see what date they were placed, but you're actually recalling them by the date they need to be finished. And beyond that, finishing out a work order is the same as a quote or any of the other transactions. So going through the 5 different types: wholesale, CWOs or special orders, layaways, quotes, and work orders. As I mentioned earlier, appointments are in another webinar, and we won't be going over those today. What I want to go over next is some changes we made to the way we deal with both deposits and the customer charge tender. So it used to be that there were certain transaction types, suspended transaction types like CWOs and layaways, that allowed deposits, and there were others like quotes and appointments that did not. And the flip side of that has to do with the customer charge tender, and why is really not worth explaining. It's just was a quirk of the way the software is developed. But it turned out that any suspended transaction that allowed a deposit would not allow you to use the customer charge tender. And any transaction that did not allow you to have a deposit would allow you to use customer charge tender. In other words, it was either or. You could either do a deposit or you could use customer charge, but you couldn't do both. That's all been changed. So all of these transaction types, including appointments, by the way, do allow you to make deposits. And when I say all of these transaction types, again, excepting simple wholesales, but all the rest of them allow you to make deposits and allow you to use the customer charge tender. And you can only use the customer charge tender on checkout. That's one thing to be aware of. And the reason has to do with receivables. I mean, this is not a completed transaction. The aging process and the statement process, receivable statement, not layaway statement, in the customer module just doesn't look at suspended sales. It's only interested in real sales. But what is different now is that any of these suspended transaction types can let you take a deposit and then let you use the customer charge tender to finish it out. So it's not only simpler, I mean, they all work the same now, it's also more robust because you can now use customer charge tender, you can use deposit on any of these. So let's take a look again at that quote thing we just did. I wanted to put in 1950 because I'm used to age verification. And we'll take the one from Mary here. And the thing that you could do now that you could not do before is use the customer charge tender on a customer that actually has the ability to charge. But so I guess rather than going through it, let me just state that you can now on any of these suspended transaction types check it out with the customer charge tender and turn it into a sale. In fact, you remember the closeout CWO and layaway query box we got earlier. If you use the customer charge tender, you're not even asked that question because we can't suspend customer charges. We can only use them to turn the transaction into a sale. All right, I'm going to go back to the Transaction Manager module now. We're going to take a look at some reports and some other options. So all of these transaction types, in fact, have their own special report. If we scroll down a bit, we'll get to those. So here's wholesales, customer waiting orders, layaways. Quotes and work orders are still reported on together, but they are noted separately. We'll see that in just a second. So we can go ahead and either look at a detail or summary version over any date range we want for suspended sales, wholesales. Go ahead and make the date range a little larger so we make sure to pick up some things. And it's very much like an electronic journal report. It shows you the items purchased, the price, discount, and amount, and shows you, what date and what time and what register and the number assigned to it, the total and the tax and all that kind of good stuff. So it's a really, it's basically an electronic journal report for wholesales. And the others have similar features, although you will also, with these, potentially see that you've got deposits. So we've got a deposit here. Got any more on the next page? Nope. You do get grand totals at the bottom for all this stuff, including the total deposit. Layaways is exactly the same. And if you notice, most of these were just one line. That's just because I do a lot of testing, and you see a lot of old things in there. But you can have as many lines in a wholesale as you can in a invoice or sale. On the quotes and work orders, you'll see over here that there's the word quote. So that's currently the way we're distinguishing between the two. We still are using the same report for both, but if we look at the next page, we see a couple of work orders there. So again, the same kind of approach, though, in terms of showing you the line items, showing you who bought it, showing you any deposits, and so very straightforward kind of reporting. Lastly, I want to call your attention to another button here on the Transaction Manager menu called Delete Suspended Transactions. So what happens a lot of times is, somebody calls in a wholesale. They say, I'm going to come in to pick up, my flower pots and my fertilizer or what have you. It doesn't matter. And you put it on hold, and then they never show up. And suspended transactions don't disappear. They are going to stay in the system for as long as you either don't manually delete them one by one or use this function to delete them over a date range. So, and what you have here is a dialog that shows you any date range you want. It defaults to year to date, but you can pick any, or excuse me, the last year, but you can pick anything you want. And you get the options to delete hold sales, customer waiting orders, quotes and work orders, and appointments. Now you'll notice layaways is not there. And the reason layaways is not there is because layaways require a deposit. And we will not delete a suspended transaction through this process that has a deposit. And that includes these other ones. So if you have a customer waiting order that's got a deposit, even if it's in this date range, it's not going to get rid of it. We think that it's just too important to track. And you still can do that manually by recalling it in the register module and hitting that delete button that we saw after you called them up. But if these things in wholesales never have deposits, and if you have old quotes and old CWOs that you just want to get rid of, this thing will allow you to do it over a date range. All right, and that concludes our discussion of suspended transactions. Thank you for attending.